basically all the things that have been done and all the things that we're doing. We just passed another bill, and I think to commend to all of you an opportunity to kind of look at this chart. And I'm going to let everybody do their individual piece. But maybe we need to go back just for a second and think about what has been happening in this area of the drugs. The first thing that happened was I went down to Southern Ohio before I was even sworn in and had a meeting with a number of ladies who had lost children. And nobody had helped them. And I said, well, I'll help you. And they were like dumbfounded. You mean you really want to help us? They said, are you crazy? Of course we're going to help you. We're going to do everything we can. So you might recall that we shut down these pill mills. Now these pill mills were making these prescription drugs available to people. In fact, as I recall, some doctors' licenses were taken away. Is that right? Some were prosecuted. Is that right, Tracy? And we actually worked with Mike DeWine, who asked us to hold off on what we did on pill mills until we could make sure we had all the evidence and could really slam the door. So that was a very big deal. And there are still, I'm understanding, pill mills in states around the country. Ours are essentially shut down. And then we started to really ramp up. So the Highway Patrol has been very involved in law enforcement. I don't see John Bourne here. I don't know, is he here? Oh. So there have been more drug busts over the course of the last 6 years than there have been in the last 60 years in this state. And that continues to ramp up, and they've actually trained our Highway Patrol to understand how actually to look for drugs. And they've had massive drug busts, and maybe, John, you're not scheduled to speak, but maybe you should kind of give them some statistics. Then we decided that look, here was the problem. And I want everybody to understand this. We took the idea of prescription drugs, not just in this state, but in this country, is something that was not very serious. When I was a kid, you went and got your wisdom teeth out, and you went home, and you slept, and you had bleeding in your mouth, and your mother brought you ice cream and Jell-O, and you watched television for a while, and you went to sleep. And you woke up the next day, and you were actually feeling pretty good, but you could squeeze off another half day of not having to go to school, you know. And then you went to school. Now, I have heard reports. I heard one this summer where some of these young people that went to get prescription drugs were given like 25, 50 pills of OxyContin. Okay, and so we had an approach here in our country, that these prescription drugs are just something that you do, that the doctors know what they're doing, and by the way, if you happen to doctor shop, or if you happen to go to emergency rooms, you go from one hospital to another hospital and get everything you need, and you know, blah, blah, blah. Now, somebody told me a story yesterday about a guy who went to get some prescription drugs. Is it the dentist, Jim, you were telling me? So the dentist now is checking orders, which we'll get to in a second. The dentist says, I see you have a prescription for 50 OxyContins. I'm not giving you anymore. This has just happened. The guy says, oh, I forgot. He didn't forget. I don't know what he was doing with those pills, but I can tell you it wasn't anything good. So we've had a whole generation of people who have become addicted to prescription drugs. Now, as it's become harder and harder to get your hands on prescription drugs, it's gotten easier and easier to get your hands on heroin. And then with the heroin, of course, it's been laced here in Ohio with fentanyl, which is one of the most powerful drugs you can do to lace it with heroin. Now, so one of the things that we wanted to do early on was to make sure that we started setting some guidelines around the area of how you prescribe. So we thought about passing a law, and you know, laws are good, but sometimes they're not as effective as if you get people to work with you. So we had the entire medical community agreeing that we should set some guidelines, we should have reporting requirements. And then we also have strengthened the pharmacy board and the medical board. And they are operating unlike they ever have in the history of this state. And you go to some of these medical board meetings, it's not always been very pretty to see what's happened at that medical board. Now, we created a system called ORS, which is a reporting requirement. And that's designed to monitor these basic guidelines that were established. Now, I guess it was on New Year's Day, I was in Westerville, and I go shopping in Westerville. And it's not unusual for me to stop at that pharmacy. I've done it a couple times, and I saw Missy. I didn't know Missy, but I said, who's the boss here? Well, it turned out to be Missy. Thank God it wasn't a guy. So Missy, how's it going with the ORS reporting? Great. I said, how many of these people that are prescribing these drugs, how many problems are you finding? And she'll talk about this. Very few. 10 years ago, it was not unusual to fill a prescription for any of these dangerous drugs that nobody even cared about. Right, Missy? And you're going to get to talk about this. She said to me, the ORS reporting process has resulted in people watching what they're doing because they know they're being monitored. And so now we have been sending letters to physicians in particular who've not been checking ORS because we want them to check ORS. We want them to know, is somebody half the pills? Are they trying to get more pills? Are they doctor shopping? And it's working. Now, we have seen a drop because of these prescription guidelines. Let me see if I have the numbers. It's pretty significant, but in perspective, is it as big as we want? I don't know, because we don't want people, where's the numbers on how many fewer prescriptions? Doses. Who's got the number? How much?
92 million.
92 million fewer prescriptions for these drugs. I happen to believe they're a gateway to heroin. You know, I'm not, and there are people that can die from obviously these prescription drugs. But what we've seen in the state, and I don't know that I can directly, I can't exactly connect it, but as the prescription drugs are getting harder to get, which means the cost of them goes up, it's easier and easier to get their hands on a cheaper substance called heroin. And I sort of look at this, you know, back when I was a young man, I used to smoke when I was at the university. And I quit. And I went to the doctor when I said, I quit smoking. How long will it take for me to have my lungs clear? He said, oh, no longer than 25 or 30 years. In other words, we have had an entire generation of people who have been exposed to these prescription drugs. And as a result of having the prescription drugs and then a greater scarcity of them and a monitoring and all these other things, we see people move into the more dangerous drugs. And imagine that heroin's not good enough, now you lace it with fentanyl, which will basically kill you. So then we started a bunch of other things. Then we started talking because, you know, and I'm sure I'm missing some of these things. But one of the things that we know is if a person hears, don't do drugs, there's a 50% less likelihood that they won't. I have no idea where those statistics come from, but they say they're real. So we started a program called Start Talking, 5 Minutes for Life. Born and the troopers are going to visit all the athletes, the boys and the girls athletes. They're usually the leaders in the school, talking to them about not doing drugs. We've tried to get the schools to adopt, when I say start talking, that's just talking to kids about drugs. Some of them do it in different ways. So they don't have to follow our protocol, but they've got to be involved. Now, John Kerry is going to instruct the universities to have in the education, colleges of education, embedded in their curriculum a way for teachers to talk to kids about not doing drugs. This is like really important. Because right now, if you say to them, talk to the kids, they say, okay, well, what do I do? Well, we send them talking points. But basically, we want it integrated in those colleges of education that our teachers are capable and confident. And it doesn't take a half an hour. It takes like 5 minutes or less than that to tell, hey, don't do the drugs, huh? They'll kill you. By the way, did you see the story in the paper today? This kid's in jail. He went to school here, now he's in jail where he died of an overdose. That's all it takes. Then I've also have talked